In this video, we're going to discuss I/O setups. Now, I/Os inside Pro Tools are nothing more than setting up what is coming in and what's coming out of your system. Most DAW applications simply just give you a certain amount of inputs and outputs, and that's all they give you. But in Pro Tools, you have much more flexibility. So you may have an audio interface that gives you 4 inputs and 4 outputs, but then you can set it up in the software to where you only receive 1 input and get 2 outs. Or maybe you want a stereo in and 2 mono for that particular stereo track. So you have more flexibility. If you're working with an external rack of hardware that you're trying to bring into Pro Tools or out of Pro Tools, you might even label your inputs and outputs according to what's connected. So things that are hardwired, you can simply just choose directly within the software and not have to look behind the gear to see what the actual connection is. This is extremely helpful. Now, the problem with I/O setups is that they're not always going to be the same. If you take this session to another studio or to another environment, you're going to find that you're not going to have the same inputs and outputs and the same configurations. So you'll create your own I/O setups, and you'll be exporting and importing I/O setups between studio environments as well as your home studio. So let's go ahead and begin. If you go into your setups menu, you can go into I/O setup. Now there's a lot that can be discussed about this I/O setup window that could definitely be further discussions, but we're going to keep this very simple right now. If you go into your input tab, we can create a new path and make this path be stereo. And I'm going to call this, for example, I'm going to call this keyboard. So I hit create. And you can see now if I hit OK and I go into this stereo track input right here, let's go ahead and make it a little bit bigger. If you go in here and choose input, you have the input named keyboard. I can also right click on this and choose to rename it directly from here. So let's say I'm working with a particular guitar effects processor. So we'll just call it guitar EFX. And if you go into your setups, go into I/O setups, you can see it's been renamed there as well. Now this is set up for input 1 and 2, but let's say we go to another studio and we want to have the same guitar effects pedal coming in on that track, but now it's not on input 1 and 2 on that interface. Well, no problem. Instead of having to go and reset it on the input, you can just go into your I/O setup and say it's coming in on, let's say, 3 and 4. So I hit OK. And the software never changed. So you're really just dealing with almost like a patch bay, if you want to call it, within Pro Tools. Very, very flexible. Now we do have a problem with this particular path that's been created here. If I hit OK and I go into a mono track right now and I choose input, I have no inputs available. This is because I did not create any subpaths for this particular stereo input. So if we go back into setups I/O and we go in and create, we have to highlight this and then we create new subpath, and let's create another one. And now we can go in here and call this gtr.efx.l. I'm going to go ahead and Command A to highlight it and then copy it, hit the tab key, and then I paste it and just put in R for the right channel. And then I can go in and assign the path to the left and the right. And when I hit OK now, I have the ability to go into a mono track and choose the left or the right side of that particular stereo path. So you can create multiple subpaths. So this is important for working with stereo and mono tracks going in as well as out. Now let's say I like this particular I/O setup and I want to use it for future sessions. I can export these particular settings and then store them within my I/O settings within my applications folder. Now, I can even import them in, and this allows me to have very unique I/O setups for certain studio environments. So these are more advanced features that will be discussed further and further as you get into next courses. But for right now, you can see the very same process for outputs, buses, inserts, and so forth. Now you may be noticing a couple things that look a little different than your I/O setups in version 8. Don't be alarmed. Version 9 gives us more buses, for example, a lot more to control. And it gives us more control with mic preamps as well as hardware insert delays. But for right now, just get really comfortable with setting up inputs and outputs and understanding how to label them by either naming them here or just simply by right-clicking and choosing Rename. Notice that I can right-click on the output and rename it as well. So I'll just call this Mains. So as you can see, I/O setups are very useful in Pro Tools. Take advantage of labeling all your ins and outs according to your setup at your studio or at your home. I think you'll find this very beneficial.